This is Kelsey, and welcome back to International Faceoff, where I look at two different teams globally and try to look at how they might match up. Like last time, this isn't going to really be two top teams, but two teams that kind of started out as top teams. One has ramped up, and one has declined. And I looked at both of these teams, and I was thinking in my head that I wanted to do some kind of content about them, but as I looked at them and reviewed them more, I realized that they're really similar, so it would make a great episode of International Face-Off. And these two teams are Team SoloMid and QG Reapers. And why I think Team SoloMid win? Because they have improved with this problem that they have, that QG Reapers also have, and why QG Reapers fail. To start off the discussion, let's talk about what these teams have in common. If you watch their games, there's an eerie amount of similarities. Just both teams have imported jungle and mid. Both teams have a much stronger top side. They've had a top laner who, traditionally has played more tanks, but has been a really, really strong asset to the team. A bot lane that maybe is a little less consistent, doesn't win as many of the matchups outright, so the teams want to find ways to play around topside, and both of them have kind of struggled a lot with it. So why is it a bit more difficult to play around topside than bot side? Well, first of all, there are more people in the bot side, so that's more kills, that's more gold, just more stuff in general. But there's also Dragon, and who really cares about Rift Herald, am I right? So if you're playing around topside, you have to find ways to make sure you're not giving up too much on the bottom. I mean, the enemy having TP might even allow the enemy top laner to avoid getting dove or to avoid having some trouble when you're trading for top anyway. Sometimes the conventional way that people have done it has really just been lane swap, When your bottom lane gets set behind, you tend to swap the bottom lane top. If your top laner is ahead, you push out, you get the tower that way. QG sort of used to do this a lot, right? They did it, I think, a little bit more than Team SoloMid have, where they have swapped their bot lane to top, they push down the turret, and they get an advantage that way on their top laner. However, they seem to have difficulty after the swaps in making sure that their AD carry could get free lane gold, because the lane in the top side would be so pushed out that the AD carry would kind of wander around the jungle looking for scraps, and it wasn't really a good situation. Rather than try to fix that problem, however, QG sort of abandoned lane swaps almost entirely, and that was a big issue. Team SoloMid's problems, I think, come a little bit more from being used to play more around a bot, because you had Doublelift and Bjergsen having this kind of relationship, and then suddenly you're put in a position where you have Wild Turtle, who's a little bit less reliable, might play far forward and aggressive in lane, and get into situations where you misplay or end up in a losing lane, whereas top Haunter is kind of more stable. They wanted to bring out more of this carry side of him, I think, and so he ends up getting a little bit more attention with Bjergsen and Svenskeren roaming top a lot more to set up these types of ganks and to set up these types of situations. Of course, I think both Team SoloMid and QG right now have situations where when they send their jungler top, or if their jungler is topside, their bottom lane is really, really vulnerable. Also with Team SoloMid in particular, I think they have some trouble moving their vision line or being aware or respectful of their enemy vision line, so when Bjergsen will roam top to make some kind of play, and there's a wider area of river on the top side of the map, Bjergsen might be more likely to cross the enemy vision line without Team SoloMid moving their own, and then he gets caught in a topside play, and this has cost them some of their game ones, because it's almost like they forget this vision line concept and then do it much better in the second game. Both teams seem to sort of want to counter this by using the top lane TP advantage or getting an advantage on their top laner, either through ganks in QG's case, or through, in Haunter's case, an ability to just rely on outplaying the enemy top laner, which I think has happened for him much more often. It's a little worrying that this seems to be the Team SoloMid mechanism, because internationally I'm not really sure that the top laners will misplay as consistently. Cabby for QG Reapers is a really strong individual player, for example, so if Team SoloMid are playing against QG and they're going to sort of rely on Team SoloMid's Haunter just outplaying and getting leads that way, that might be the first sign of where QG can take advantage of this and have their own advantage, but I honestly just think that Team SoloMid's bottom lane is better than QG's anyway, so you're in a similar situation, where against QG it might even be better for Team SoloMid to play around bot. But anyway, if they have a top advantage, they tend to use the TP to go bottom more often. QG have kind of set up this weird situation where they'll play like these weird Akali cheese comps, and then they'll try for these like blue plays or these bot plays instead to use their TP advantage, and it kind of hasn't worked out. It just makes them feel like they're forcing stuff much more. However, I think Team SoloMid, because they're so used to it, even with an old AD carry, it works a little bit better for them. Either way, neither of these teams are generally really good at like 1-4 or 1-1. I do think Team SoloMid have improved this a little bit, but both of them kind of prefer to team fight a little bit more, group a little bit more. This has led to situations like against the Cloud9 series where when TSM didn't really have a tank, right, both teams also seem to like having tanks a little bit more, which is kind of a contradiction because if you're relying on your top laner to get ahead, you sometimes really want a top lane carry. But where they had Rumble instead of a tank, and they overcommitted to a push, and then Rumble wasn't necessarily as tanky as what the kind of top they're used to playing with, and they lost a fight off of this situation. Meanwhile, I think QG have a little bit of a different situation where they rely too much on having a top. Their top gets much further ahead than some of their other positions, except maybe mid, and then you get into a fight where the top is like unkillable, but you can't do any damage, so you're not really accomplishing anything. So I think that this is definitely a QG situation, one of QG's problems, or one of Team SoloMid's problems with grouping a player on top. Like I said, though, I think TSM have gotten a little bit better. They've played things like Shen Echo comps that much better at splitting. I think both teams are pretty good at like the Shen thing, which is a really good way to use like both to kind of cheat, right? Where you're playing a 1-4 or a split and you push out with the Shen more and you can still group for team fights and stuff like that works really well. The problem is that Shen is going to kind of be perma-banned, and I think we've seen Team SoloMid just play better with carries in general with like the Camille, and maybe this is again because Hanzo is getting a lot of the leads on his own, so it's not as big of a deal, whereas QG are relying on these like sort of weird lane swaps where they ambush people in the jungle to get their top laner ahead consistently, and it's just not working out for them. I feel like they're trying to remedy the situation by coming up with some sort of gimmick or weird strategy, and it's just not fundamentally fixing the problem, which is that they don't know how to trade for topside. I mean, there are some good examples of topside trades where if you watch, KT versus SKT, Misfits versus Unicorns of Love, where they actually just leave their mid and top, in position, and when they're making a trade for topside, or a play on topside with their jungler, they have their bot lane go ahead and go mid and set up a play mid, so they're able to give up bot, right, and give up bot pressure, but make plays on two lanes simultaneously, which I think is fine. So this type of thing, perfecting lane swaps, stuff like this, is stuff that QG should be really looking at more, but they're instead going for like these weird kind of Akali dive things, stuff like this, that I don't think is going to work for them long term. Whereas I feel like Team SoloMid also have this problem where they're relying on something that might not be reliable for them, but hey, I think that they're like improving things like their vision line, improving their ability to communicate across the map, and just getting a little bit better at pathing around the Raptors. Like, a thing that I think is really valuable for Team SoloMid is when you're on blue side and you're playing around top, it's much easier to control like these Raptor camps, right? So I think that you see games where Svenskeren is getting like multiple Raptors off of like this topside control. So I think Team SoloMid are maximizing these factors a little bit better than QG, and that's why I give them the edge in this matchup ultimately. They're forcing a little less. They're slowly making these improvements and these advantages, whereas I think QG, you just are watching the steady decline, like where they're just losing more and more of their matches because they really, really can't get a handle on this. Anyway, that's it for International Faceoff. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please continue to watch the series. As mid-season invitational gets closer, I think I'm going to go back to more of the top team versus top team, because that's what people are more interested in as international competitions come up, and maybe add in some wild card or things like this might be a lot of fun. Thanks.